Welcome to MyTownMatters. I'm your host, Frank Schroth. MyTownMatters is a broadcast about issues, events, and people that matter to Milton, Massachusetts. Today, my two guests are Bob Hiss, chairman of the Milton Republican Committee, and Judy White Orlando, chairperson of the Milton Democratic Committee. Welcome to you both, and thanks for coming.
Glad to be here.
If we could start with your respective committees. Bob, maybe you first. If you could give us a profile of the Milton Republican Committee, when does it meet, where does it meet, what its mission is, what your hopes are, et cetera, those sorts of things.
Sure. So the committee is comprised of up to 35 people. We have 32 members right now, plus a couple associate members. The only requirement for membership is that you're a registered Republican and live in Milton. Other than that, as membership goes, that's the only requirement. But we have other folks who are independents or who live here part-time, live in other towns, and come and join the meetings in order to participate in our functions. We meet roughly once a month, either here at Town Hall or over at the library, so we pick a different spot. And the mission really is to help elect candidates locally. And we've built a strategic plan recently that said our goal is to go elect candidates at the local level, the state level, and assist at the federal level who believe about political issues the same way that we do. We do some charitable work, so we help an organization in Weymouth called Care Packs, which puts together packages of goods and sends them to our soldiers overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. So we started that last year. We have another event coming up in May 15, and so we collect money, collect goods, work with this organization, donate our time, and do charity work like that.
Hey, Judy, is that?
We operate pretty much the same. We have 35 members that are elected on the ballot when the president is elected. Probably the same for you.
Right.
And we have lifelong members, which I am a member of the lifelong committee. And there's probably 15 lifelong members of the Milton Democratic Town Committee. And then we have about 25 associate members that can just join. You have to be a registered Democrat. And we don't support people in primaries, but we do support the Democratic nominee in state and national elections.
Okay, so that's a good point. So with regard to the caucus that place, those delegates aren't committed to date to anyone. That will come out of whoever wins whether it's Val Patrick or Ms. Stein.
Is Ms. Stein, is she she's a Democrat?
Evidently, yes. She was previously with the Green Party,
okay.
And I guess she's changed her party affiliation, and she's now a candidate for governor in the Democratic
So at our
Party.
recent caucus, February 11th, we elected 10 women and 10 men and 4 alternates to attend our caucus. Grace Ross would need to get 5% of the delegates to get her name on the ballot. Whether she can do that or not, I don't know. So, people will go to that convention June 5th in Worcester. And it's my understanding that Deval Patrick and Tim Murray will be elected as representatives of the Democratic Party.
Okay. And when is the Republican convention?
April 17, if I have my dates right, in Worcester.
Is it at the Centrum? Or?
We're at the Centrum.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And which is where we were last year. Nice central spot for people across the state, and it doesn't become too Boston-dominated.
And is in a similar way, are those delegates for anybody at this point in time? You got my host, and there's Charlie Baker.
No, they're uncommitted. We had an election caucus, just as Judy did. We elected. We have 20 plus 5 ex officio members, so we can send 25 to the convention. And no, neither the committee nor the delegates are pre-committed prior to going, so they're free to go vote their choice when they arrive at the convention.
So any conversation about politics, at least in Massachusetts at this time, sort of has to talk about Scott Brown. And back at Thanksgiving, anybody had asked me, you're going to have a Republican senator from Massachusetts, I just would not have believed that. And yet here he is. And thinking about him and thinking about politics in the state, I, for whatever reason, I was reminded about Benson's quote to Quayle, "You're no Kennedy." And evidently neither is Coakley. And so the question that raises for me, and the one I'd like to hear your thoughts on, is, was Brown's election a function of personality as much as position? I mean, here's a guy who just seems like a very nice guy, driving around in a truck. you're going to have a Republican senator from Massachusetts. I just would not have believed that. And yet here he is. And thinking about him and thinking about politics in the state, I, for whatever reason, I was reminded about Benson's quote to Quayle, "You're no Kennedy." And evidently neither is Coakley. And so the question that raises for me, and the one I'd like to hear your thoughts on, is, was Brown's election a function of personality as much as position? I mean, here's a guy who just seems like a very nice guy, driving around in a truck, very regular type of guy, versus Coakley, who had a tendency to come across as slightly stern and a little bit cold or wonky. I'm not quite sure what the right word is. So the question is, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, where did this guy come from, and why was he able to capture so much attention and obviously support? Bob, why don't we?
Sure. I think when significant things like this happen, they happen for a series of cascading reasons, not one, any one of which could have changed the ultimate outcome. I think you're right. Martha Coakley was probably a weak candidate. I heard even Barney Frank was on the radio this past week, and he said he thought it was one of the weaker campaigns he'd seen run, in contrast to Brown, who he said ran almost a perfect campaign. So he had a weaker candidate and a very good candidate, so that was one. Second, I think the type of campaign they ran was different. We saw Coakley start to go negative fairly early, and Brown resisted it himself right up to the end. Now, they both had outside forces coming in that you can't control, outside groups. Senatorial campaign committee came in for Coakley, and there were fringe groups that come in for Brown. Mm-hmm. But they took a different tack, and I think that resonated, and I think people appreciated Brown staying positive. And lastly, I think there is a backlash that occurs, and it hit Massachusetts as it hits periodically. And I think we're in one right now at a national level. And this is probably the fourth time in my life that I've been alive for it. So it happened after the dominant Johnson Congress in the 60s. The backlash created Nixon. Mm-hmm. It happened after the dominant Congress in the 70s. The backlash created Reagan. It happened after 94, when the Republicans took control of Congress. It saved Clinton, because Clinton then reacted to it nimbly and got reelected and became a successful president. And now I think it's happening again in this case, when we have a dominant party holding two of the branches of government. And governing from the left, I think, creates this reaction. So I think all those things came together. Mm-hmm. But if you changed any one of those, I think it would have been very hard for Brown to have won. But it was more than just a nice guy, a good candidate, a good campaign, and the right moment.
Judy, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with Bob. I think Scott Brown caught a wave. I think Martha Coakley, after a tough primary, was out of money. And $13 million came in from outside of Massachusetts to help Scott Brown. I thought he had a great media campaign. I thought his ads were good. He's a very charismatic, good-looking man.
And a great story.
Great story, came up from poverty, and I happen to work in Rentham.
Oh,
and,
do you?
I've had him into our schools to visit. And again, I think he caught a wave. I think Martha is an intellect. She's an attorney general. She's fighting crime. And, I just think Scott Brown, ran a great campaign. I want to congratulate him. And I hope he's more than just a 41st vote. I hope he's an independent.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife mentioned that today. She said there's a quote from him where he said, well, I might be the 41st vote or I might be the 60th. So to that point, I think he's trying to carve himself out as being sort of independent-minded. In hindsight, would Lynch have been a better candidate, or Capuano? I mean, Lynch comes to mind as, he never even really got into the race. But given his positions, given that he's a slightly more conservative bent, do you think he might have had a better chance?
I personally think Capuano would have been a better candidate. I think he has the fire in his belly. I think he, runs great elections. He won that seat in Congress. That was a difficult fight for him. And again, I think you have to really feel it and taste it if you're going to run for public office. And I think, to Scott Brown's credit, I think he connected with the voters. And I think, Martha is just a different style personality-wise. And, I think
As an aside, I heard a story toward that was interesting. At the debate that occurred up at UMass Boston, a big Teamster truck pulls up. Guys get out and they're holding their Coakley signs. Brown got there a little early, and he walks up to the crowd, and he's shaking hands with everybody in the crowd, including the Teamster guys holding the Coakley signs. And a couple of them whispered, and the guy that told me the story was there, and he said, by the way, we were paid $50 to hold the sign, but we're really voting for you, Scott. So here's this guy doing retail politics like you got to do in a crowd. And Martha Coakley came up in the big SUV, went right up to the front door, got out, and right into the debate, and didn't have that personal touch to go connect with these people out there. So it's just an example of perhaps the individual in the campaign.
Well, that's an interesting
difference, right?
And I just wanted to add, I think, Scott Brown, I think Barack Obama did the same thing. He connected with people, he reached out and touched people, and I think people wanted change. And that's what got him elected, too.
Well, that's an interesting circle back to the whole Kennedy mystique, whatever you want to call it. If you went to the JFK Center when he lied in state, with thousands. So that notion of touching, that he was masterful at that. Bringing it down to a little bit of a local level, Brian Joyce. I want to call your attention to a new website called massbeacon.com. It is written by a guy named Connor Units, who had a website and blog about the Kennedy race, which evidently was very popular, got a lot of attention, and now he's got a fairly interesting website about Massachusetts politics, and it covers all races, and it's pretty interesting. And so what he did was he took a look at the turnout across the state for Scott Brown, and then sort of did a rough assessment of what are the chances of, what does this mean for the Democrats? And he's saying, are state Senate seats at risk? And he looked at Brian Joyce's district, looked at the results. Brown won the district by about 5,000 votes. Is there any substance to that, or is that just fluky and really Brian? Again, if somebody told me someone was going to be Brian Joyce, I'd be extremely surprised. What do you think, Bob?
Well, I think...
Can that wave carry on down?
If all those three things I said before happen again, then it could. So, but the issue is Brian, I think, is a good campaigner. We obviously yet to see what his campaign will be like. I think the wave that, it's a good word you used, that Brown caught is still there for other candidates to catch. So the question is, can a candidate come up and challenge Brian, catch the wave, run a good campaign, and be positive and focus on issues? Then I think anyone is vulnerable if all those three events occur. But if Brian runs a good campaign, and he's proven he can in the past, then it's going to be a tough thing to unseat an incumbent, as we see anywhere in the country.
Well, Senator Brian Joyce delivers, and he's at every town meeting. He meets with all the Board of Selectmen in his district, and what he's delivered to Milton with the 90% reimbursement for our 6 schools, is probably his greatest accomplishment. So I think he would be hard to beat, and I think the fact that he connects with voters and that he's in touch with all of the constituents and the elected officials about, what money's coming from the state, what additional things he can do, like, the trolley money and money for lights and intersections, and, the money for the pilot for the MDC, payment in lieu of taxes. And those are the things that he really delivers on. And I think he's bright, and I think he really thinks out of the box.
I think the things, though, that are part of the wave that could hurt a candidate are people are becoming aware that the gravy train that was at the state level or at the federal level is hitting its limits. And if you start to make a connection between even the override, in effect what we did in Milton is we said, everyone in favor of the people in Quincy paying for our schools, raise your hand. Because we went to the state and collected state money that came from citizens outside of Milton. Mm-hmm. Well, I think with the current recession occurring, the trouble that the state is having keeping their income levels, their tax level, their revenue high, that gravy train is over. And people, I think, see a connection between the fact that our town has to live within its means, our state does, our federal government does, because there are real hard economic limits that are going to be imposed on us. So to say that I'm going to vote for me to the state because I'm going to bring the bacon home, I think the bacon is pretty lean right now.
I agree with you, but there is, a state education reform. There's an equation, and money comes back to each school district, and it's based on an equation. And Milton has always been very low. Like Marshfield receives more money than Milton. Hingham receives more money than Milton for its schools. And so the fact that we could recoup for our school buildings, I don't feel that, it's something that we didn't deserve. I think that money has been there, and all towns and cities, many of them are rebuilding their schools. And, if you don't keep up with your infrastructure, your town is not desirable, and your bond rating will fall.
And I'd like to pursue that in a sec. But first, quickly, Bob, could you, the local Democrats at the state level, Joyce, Timothy, Forey, they're so dominant. Can you give us a couple names of who are some Republicans at that level that we should be thinking about or watching?
I'm fairly new to the town committee, so I'm more familiar with some of the candidates who were running for some of the congressional offices than from some of the state offices.
Okay, fair enough. So moving on to this notion of the budget and Proposition 2.5 and this living within limits. Is it your thought, Bob, that the town has not been living within its limits and needs to? Or, because here's the question. The question is this. The question is Proposition 2.5, some officials would say has been and always will be an enormous burden for a town to carry because it doesn't enable the officials of the town to come up with a budget that'll help them address things years going forward. And so that they're constantly, well, right now they're constantly in a crisis mode, but even prior to the current recession, if you go back 8 years or whatever, they've always, as long as I've lived in the town, there's always been this notion of overrides. And so the question I guess I have, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is Proposition 2.5 proven to be is it doing what it's supposed to do, or is it handicapping officials going forward in terms of trying to manage town budgets effectively?
I think it was designed to handicap officials, and I think it's doing what it was designed to do. I think the assumption that needs to be challenged is what is driving the cost increases that are exceeding a 2.5% inflation rate, when, for example, for the last few years, inflation has generally been flat. For example, healthcare costs would be one of those things that drive it. The healthcare costs are negotiated with individual unions, for example, here in town, who, as I understand it, don't participate, for example, in some of the statewide pools that may be available. If I have my facts right, it was either in 08 or 09, the town had the opportunity to go to its unions and say, could you join the statewide pool and achieve some savings for the town? I think it was the teachers union in particular that I think said either they needed more time to study it and we missed a deadline, so we lost that opportunity to perhaps lower some of our health care costs. So here's a case where the town officials who are handicapped try to go, in a good faith effort, lower their cost, but they are handicapped because some of the underlying costs are out of their control. And I think that is what citizens get frustrated by when we come to them and ask them for an override. So the citizens are saying, have you done everything you can to go after those underlying costs before you come back to me yet again and ask for more taxes?
So, Judy, would you share that opinion?
Well, what he's referring to is the GIC,
right.
the Group Insurance Commission,
right.
And I agree with him. I think that the town and the unions and the teachers should have gone for that proposal. But I do think the town in the last 5 years has been able to save on insurance costs. I've talked to some of the selectmen about that recently. But
do you have the detail on that? I mean, Bob's, I think, essentially correct. And I apologize. I don't know. But I thought that there was one or two holdouts that they needed everyone 70%. To buy in, and not everybody. So a majority bought in, but not everybody bought in,
right.
and they missed a deadline,
right.
and that killed it because it doesn't come around again for some period of time.
Right. I think probably, I might not have my fact, but it's about 5% of towns and cities in Massachusetts that have done the GIC, mm-hmm. and it's a good thing to do. But it was hard to move the masses, and I think what would be good is if Governor Deval Patrick would say, maybe change that ruling and have the town officials just decide to go with the group insurance, and that would save us $1 million.
So, okay, so that's a good question.
Yeah.
Are there things the governor could do
Yes.
to make this easier for the towns and municipalities? Because again, in talking to a couple town officials, you're probably aware of the situation in Milton where right now they're about to go into town meeting. The governor has made a cut in state aid, but the legislature hasn't passed this. And so the Warrant Committee is trying to make a determination, which they have. They've come up with a number. It'll be presented, but it's in anticipation of the cut being made. The point being, again, if you were to talk to some of the department heads, they would argue, Jesus, I had a budget, now I don't have a budget. This kind of fits and starts, and you can and you can't, and makes it extremely hard for somebody to run a police department, a fire department, a school system. And so are there things that could be done that would ease that, or is the current recession just this wave of trouble that just seems to build and iterate? And
I think these are very hard economic times. Myself and my co-workers, we took no raises this year. And that saved other people's positions. And, I wish other unions would go ahead and just say for a year or two, we're not going to take any increases to save and keep people employed. But I do think the stimulus money has helped Massachusetts. It's extended people's unemployment, and it's also allowed them to pay longer on their COBRA for a less amount of money. So, I do want to thank the Obama administration for that. It's also put money into our schools, and some of that money has gone into our police department to save jobs. So, it's just, these are not, easy times to govern in, and it's, who wouldn't want to run for public office?
Yeah.
It's very hard.
So the unions, they seem to come up over and over in terms of trying to grapple with some of these issues, and that segues to another topic I wanted to get your thoughts on quickly. So MCAS, standardized testing, Obama had an initiative, Race to the Top, where he was going to grant funds to schools. Milton is not participating, nor, my understanding is, are a lot of schools. Now, Milton in particular, my understanding is the Title I funds aren't, it's driven by Title I funding, and the amount that Milton could get from this is not all that significant. But bottom line is, to qualify for the funds, you had to have the school administration, the union, and the school committee sign off. And the school unions were balking, not only in Milton, but in a lot of towns, because pay increases were being tied to performance.
I think Milton made a mistake. The district I work in signed on to it. I work in 2 school districts. They both signed on to it. I mean, I think that we have to take all of the money we can get for our school districts. I mean, it's very hard. I think there's very little waste in public schools. I'm there every day. People work very hard. Kids have a lot of needs. And, I wish Milton would revisit it and go for the race for the top.
Your thoughts, Bob?
Yeah, I saw a number of emails float around when we learned about Milton not taking advantage of that. And there was incredible frustration by saying, why is our town, when presented with this opportunity, have to go talk to the employees to get their permission to take extra funds into the organization in order to go help teach students better? That is just the kind of thing that gets people's backs up and says, so you want me to come back and now pay more taxes in because we haven't been able to convince the employees to go take available funds that are outside? They just find that incredibly illogical. And that's the kind of anger that builds up that causes these waves to happen and these backlashes to happen.
But I just want to add, in the last year's override, there were things that all of the top administrators in the public schools and in the town took no raises.
That was noted, yeah.
Yes.
People noticed that.
Noticed that. And, what the teachers did, they did. But I'm not going to punish children because I don't agree with everything that's been done in the town. And to have class sizes go to 30 and to lose 12 positions, and this year they're looking to lose 24 positions, I am going to support an override, and I am going to pay more taxes because I think we want our children educated. And people like town services. They like their street lights. They like their yardways picked up. They like the street sweeper. They want the police there when they're in trouble. So people like those services.
Yeah, my view on this is, if I espouse the classic Republican view, is we like local government, and the farther it gets away, the more we dislike it, because the money goes off to a giant, ever bigger piles over which we lose any kind of control or comprehension and understanding of it. So I think all the members of our committee and everybody in Milton would say, yes, I like the police service and the fire and the trash in the schools. The frustration comes when we don't feel like the employees of all those services are in the boat with us. And we've got to go consult and get their permission in order to go make the kind of changes that might, as consumers of these services, allow us to get better services. So that's going to be the obstacle. So I've supported it since I moved to Milton 12 years ago. Supported every override since I was here because I believe in that local government and I want it to do well. But even I'm now getting frustrated. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are going to say a message needs to be sent, something seriously needs to change, because it's difficult to go back to the well. Because in my company, like you, we took no raises, and it's hard to go provide them out to public employees when the private sector is not getting them.
And in President Obama's inaugural speech, he asked people to take no raises, to save jobs for their fellow citizens. So we probably agree on more things than we disagree. We wanted to announce 2 things that we want to do together.
Oh, good. Please,
Milton
I'd like to hear
Democratic
that.
Town Committee and the Republican Town. The first thing we're going to do is we're both going to make, through our committees, a contribution to the Milton Residence Fund. And that
Which is
link...
just to be clear, that's the fund that helps provide support for families in need here in the town.
Right.
Through whatever channels.
And that link can be found on the Town of Milton website. So we both want to make contributions. And the second thing, when we have our community day for cleanup, Bob and I are going to bring our committees together, and we're going to do a cleanup assignment that the Board of Selectmen give to us.
We'll get dirty.
Yeah, together. Together.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
And so a good, solid, local, bipartisan effort that will benefit the town.
That's right.
It's good and healthy.
Without spending any money.
That's right.
Spending any money. Just time. It's just time. So getting back to the municipal service financing conundrum. Again, Republicans are historically pro-business. Business is not something that is promoted heavily here in Milton. Thoughts on that, Bob? Should that change?
I think we have opportunities to change it. We do have, if I count right, 3 commercial zones today. We're starting to see some improvements, for example, in the Elliott Street intersection there with new construction going up. I think the Fruit Center area, the Marketplace area is a nice development. The new restaurant that has come into East Milton Village, or East Milton, is a nice development. And as I talk to members out there, I think either whether Republicans or Democrats alike are both split, for example, on the new commercial development being proposed and running through town meeting right now. I think that's more of a personal issue of should the town never change because I want it to be just like it was when I grew up or when I bought in, or do you believe in the argument that a commercial tax-based diversification might help us? As I talk to folks, it's more of an individual opinion rather than a consistent political viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I happened to have the luxury to grow up in town, and the thinking was to keep commercial development out. But now that people, the generations, it's my personal view that, as both parents are working, we don't want to drive to Quincy, and we don't want to drive to Weymouth or Hyde Park. We'd like to do our shopping right here in the town. It provides jobs for teenagers, management-level jobs, and I do think some aesthetically pleasing commercial development is good for the town. That's my view, not the town committee.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to both of you for coming in. Great to meet you.
Thanks for having us.
I'm thrilled to hear about this bipartisan effort, and by all means, get in touch.
We'll
I'll promote it.
keep it up. Yes.
We'll promote it on the website. Thanks, and have a great day.